nobody tells you about your husband's retirement party is that it feels nothing like a celebration, it feels like a warning. I remember standing by the punch bowl in the corner of the banquet hall, watching Harold work the room the way he always did. Hand on a shoulder here, a laugh there, that slow nod he gave when he wanted someone to feel heard. 41 years he'd run Whitmore & Sons Lumber, started by his father in 1962 in a garage off Route 9 in Asheville, North Carolina. Now the whole company was gathered in this rented hall with its fake ferns and fluorescent lighting to send him off. And Harold was smiling, and I was smiling, and somewhere in the back of my mind I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. That was 14 months before the morning I sat alone at my kitchen table with a manila envelope in my hands, reading documents that made my stomach drop so hard I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. Documents that told me my own son had been quietly, methodically, legally dismantling everything his father spent 41 years building, and had been doing it for almost 2 years before Harold even retired. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. At the party, with the woman in the gray blazer who found me by the punch bowl and handed me something I almost didn't take. Her name was Louisa. She'd been Harold's executive assistant for 16 years, quiet, precise, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and never missed a filing deadline. She wasn't the type to make scenes or say things she didn't mean. So when she pressed a sealed envelope into my hand that evening and said quietly, "Don't open this here. Read it when you're alone. Please," I paid attention. I tucked it into my purse without a word. Harold was across the room accepting a crystal plaque from the Chamber of Commerce. My son Garrett stood beside him, beaming, one hand on his father's shoulder. My son-in-law Price was there too, holding a glass of champagne and laughing at something one of the board members said. They both looked so proud, so devoted. I smiled and watched them and felt the weight of that envelope against my hip all night. We got home around 10. Harold was tired, genuinely tired in the way that had been worrying me for months, a bone-deep exhaustion that wasn't just age. He'd been to 3 doctors by then. They'd said different things. None of them had said anything reassuring. He went to bed before 11 and I sat at the kitchen table in my robe and I opened the envelope. There were 4 pages inside, printed emails with dates. The earliest one was from 22 months ago. The emails were between Garrett and a commercial real estate investment group out of Charlotte called Meridian Capital Partners. The subject lines were things like Whitmore asset valuation and timeline for transition, and in one email that made me read it 3 times, post-Harold scenario. Post-Harold. My son had written the words post-Harold scenario in an email while his father was still running the company, while his father was still healthy enough to run the company. I sat there for a long time. Then I went to bed, lay next to Harold in the dark, listened to him breathe, and didn't sleep until almost 4 in the morning. I didn't say anything for 2 days. I know that sounds strange. You'd think the first thing you'd do is confront someone, demand answers, do something. But I've been married for 43 years and I've raised 2 children, and I've learned that acting before you understand something fully is how you lose. I wanted to understand first. What I understood from those 4 pages was this. Garrett had been in negotiations with Meridian Capital about selling the Whitmore & Sons timber rights, not the whole company, just the rights, for somewhere in the range of $4 million. The problem was that those timber rights were not Garrett's to sell. They were held in a family trust that Harold had established in 2009, and any transaction involving them required Harold's signature and the signature of the trustee, which was Harold's younger brother, my brother-in-law Clarence. Garrett knew this. He'd been named to the company's board of directors 3 years ago. He knew exactly what was in that trust. On the 3rd day, I called Louisa. She picked up on the 2nd ring. She sounded like she'd been waiting. "How much do you know?" I asked her. "More than what's in those pages," she said. "But I wanted you to read those first. I wanted you to see it for yourself." She told me she'd found out by accident, an email misdirected to her inbox, a thread that was meant to go to Garrett's personal account. She'd almost deleted it, then she read it. Then she printed it and kept it in her desk drawer for 6 weeks, trying to decide what to do. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not Harold?" There was a pause. "Because I've watched Mr. Whitmore for 16 years, she said. "And he is not a well man right now, and those boys know it. I had to set the phone down for a moment. I pressed my hand flat on the kitchen counter and breathed. "Okay," I said when I picked it back up, "tell me everything." What Louisa told me over the next hour changed the shape of everything I thought I knew about the past 2 years. Garrett had been negotiating with Meridian since Harold's first health scare, the one we'd thought was a minor cardiac event 18 months ago, the one Harold had minimized and the doctors had been cautiously optimistic about. Within 3 weeks of that hospitalization, Garrett had made initial contact with Meridian Capital. Price, my daughter Nora's husband, was involved too. He was a commercial attorney, which was part of how they thought they could make this work. He drafted a document, a proposed amendment to the family trust, that would have shifted sole signatory authority to Garrett in the event that Harold became incapacitated or otherwise unable to execute his duties. The language was vague enough to be dangerous, and there were emails suggesting they'd been slowly building a case that Harold's recent health issues already qualified. They were going to argue that Harold was already incapacitated. They were going to use his illness to take what wasn't theirs. I think about that sentence a lot. I've thought about it almost every day since. My son was going to use his father's sickness to steal from him, from us, from the family his father had spent his entire life building something for. I asked Louisa if she had copies of the draft amendment Price had prepared. She did. We met at a coffee shop in Weaverville 2 days later. She drove 40 minutes each way without complaining, and she handed me a folder. Inside were the printed emails, the draft amendment, a valuation report Meridian had commissioned on the timber rights, and something else I hadn't expected, a handwritten note in Harold's handwriting, folded in thirds. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "He left it on my desk about 3 months ago," she said, with a sticky note that just said, "Hold on to this for me, Lou. Don't file it, just hold it." I unfolded it. It said, "If anything happens to me before I can get this sorted, make sure Bev sees all of it. She'll know what to do. Don't let the boys get ahead of her." Bev, that's what Harold called me. Has since the 2nd year we were married. He'd known. He hadn't told me directly. Maybe he was still piecing it together. Maybe he didn't want to frighten me. Maybe he was still hoping he was wrong about his own son. But he'd known enough to leave a trail. He'd known enough to trust Louisa. He'd known enough to make sure I would find out even if he couldn't get there himself. I sat in that coffee shop and I cried for about 4 minutes. Then I stopped, blew my nose, and asked Louisa if she knew a good attorney who wasn't connected to anyone in Harold's professional circle. She knew one. A woman named Patrice who'd handled the state litigation for 30 years and, according to Louisa, did not lose. I called Patrice that same afternoon. I didn't tell Harold, not yet. I know that sounds like I was keeping secrets from my own husband, and in a way I was, but I want you to understand why. Harold's health had been deteriorating slowly but steadily since the cardiac event. The stress of knowing what I found out, knowing what his son had been doing, could have hurt him, physically hurt him. His cardiologist had been very clear about stress management, and I knew Harold well enough to know that if he found out, he would confront Garrett directly and immediately, and that would destroy any legal advantage we had. I needed to understand what we were dealing with before we did anything that couldn't be undone. Patrice was direct, which I appreciated. She reviewed everything Louisa had given me and called me back the next morning. "The proposed trust amendment is unenforceable as drafted," she said. "But it's sophisticated enough that it would cause significant delays and legal costs if someone tried to push it through." That's probably the point. Delay and confusion favor the side with access to the assets. Which would be Garrett, I said. If he could get that amendment executed, yes, he'd have the ability to act on your husband's behalf on company matters. Combined with his board position, he'd effectively control the timber rights transaction. What do? First, she said, we make sure that amendment never gets executed. Then we document everything. And then, if your husband is willing, we look at restructuring the trust entirely to remove any ambiguity about authority. Harold, it turned out, was willing. Very willing, when I finally sat down with him, on a Thursday evening in March, with a folder spread across the kitchen table. He was quiet for a long time. He picked up each page slowly, read it carefully, set it down. When he got to the Meridian valuation report, he stopped. $4.2 million, he said. That's what they commissioned the valuation for. The timber rights are worth closer to 6.5, he said quietly. They were going to shortchange the trust, too. He put the papers down. He looked out the window for a while. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure, he finally said. I've been watching Garrett for about 8 months. Little things. Missing signatures. Meetings I wasn't told about. I thought maybe I was just getting old and paranoid. You weren't paranoid. No, he said. I wasn't. We met with Patrice together the following week. Harold was sharp in that meeting, sharper than I'd seen him in months. Something about having a clear enemy, I think, woke something up in him. He and Patrice restructured the trust over the next 6 weeks. Harold also added a new provision. Clarence remained co-trustee, and any transaction involving trust assets now required written approval from both Harold and Clarence, with a mandatory 30-day review period that neither could waive. He also, quietly, had Patrice send a certified letter to Meridian Capital's legal team, noting that Whitmore & Sons Lumber's family trust was not currently and had never been authorized to enter into negotiations regarding the timber rights, and that any further contact from Meridian regarding such negotiations should be directed to Patrice's office. We didn't say a word to Garrett or Price. Garrett called me on a Wednesday in April. He was cheerful. He wanted to take Harold and me to dinner that weekend, he said, somewhere nice, to celebrate Harold's retirement. He mentioned a new Italian place in downtown Asheville. That sounds lovely, I said. We'd enjoy that. I got off the phone and sat down on the couch. Nora called me the same evening. My daughter, who I love, who I had not spoken to about any of this because I didn't know how deep her involvement went. She asked how Dad was doing, asked about his last cardiology appointment, said Price had mentioned he was thinking about coming to visit with Garrett next week to talk about some company transition paperwork. What kind of paperwork? I asked, keeping my voice careful and even. I'm not sure, she said. Price mentioned something about Harold signing off on some administrative updates. You know how he is with the legal stuff, he doesn't always explain it to me. I believed her. I still believe her. Nora was being used by her husband just the way I'd almost been used by my son. She hadn't been told what it was actually for. Tell Price there's no rush, I said. Harold's doctor has him on a no-stress protocol for the next few weeks. Any company business can wait. There was a pause. Of course, Nora said. I'll tell him. The dinner happened that Saturday. The Italian place was nice, candlelit, linen tablecloths, the kind of bread that comes warm in a basket. Garrett was warm and funny the way he is when he wants something. Price was more restrained, watching Harold with an attention I now recognized for what it was. We ordered wine. We talked about the grandchildren, Garrett's kids, who I adore. We talked about Harold's plans for retirement, the woodworking he wanted to get back to, maybe some travel. Then, over the second course, Garrett reached into the jacket pocket of his blazer and brought out a folded document. Dad, he said, I hate to do business at dinner, but there are a few administrative items that need your signature before the end of the quarter. Price put together a simplified summary. It's really just routine board authorization stuff, shouldn't take 5 minutes. He slid it across the table toward Harold. Harold picked it up, opened it, read it, and I watched my husband's face do something I will never forget, a kind of slow, deliberate settling, like a man deciding on something and finishing the deciding all at once. He folded it back up. He set it down on the tablecloth. He picked up his wine glass and took a sip. No, he said. Garrett blinked. Sorry? I'm not signing this, Harold said, or anything else related to Whitmore trust assets. If you have questions about why, you can contact Patrice Holloway at Holloway State Law in Asheville. She represents the trust. The silence at that table was extraordinary. I watched Garrett's face go through about 4 different expressions in the space of 2 seconds. Price went very still. Dad, Garrett started. I love you, Harold said. His voice was even, quiet. You are my son and I love you. But I know what you've been doing, and it ends tonight. I've restructured the trust. The timber rights are protected. Meridian Capital has been notified, and Patrice has a complete record of the correspondence you and Price had with them going back 22 months. Price set his fork down. We'll deal with the family part of this separately, Harold said. Right now, I'd like to finish my dinner. He picked up his fork. He took a bite of his pasta. He looked out toward the restaurant's front window for a moment, and then he looked back at me. I reached across the table and I took his hand. The months that followed were not easy. I won't pretend they were. Garrett went through denial, then anger, then a period of silence that lasted almost 2 months. Price retained his own attorney. Not that there was much to be done. The correspondence Patrice held made the situation clear enough that any litigation would have been embarrassing at best. Nora found out the full extent of what Price had been involved in through her own attorney, whom she retained about 6 weeks after that dinner. I will say only that she was devastated and that she was not complicit, and that she is a stronger woman now than she was then. Harold's health continued to decline, not because of the confrontation. I've asked myself that question many times, and his cardiologist was clear that the trajectory was already set. He passed away in October, 8 months after that Saturday dinner, surrounded by family in our home. Garrett was there. They had spoken, privately, a few weeks earlier. I don't know exactly what was said. I don't need to. What I know is what Harold said to me on one of his last good evenings when we were sitting out on the back porch watching the light go off the mountains. "You handled it better than I would have," he said. "You're the one who left the note with Louisa," I said. I didn't know if it would be enough. It was enough, I told him. It was exactly enough. The timber rights were later sold, legitimately, with proper trust authorization, with Clarence's co-signature and the required review period, for $6.8 million, which went into a revocable trust for the benefit of Harold's grandchildren, the 4 grandchildren, including Garrett's. I think about that sometimes. I think Harold would want me to. I still live in the house in Asheville. I have the porch where we sat that evening. I have the mountains going gold and orange in October, which is always how I'll think of Harold now, in October light, in the mountains, telling me I handled it better than he would have. He was wrong about that. I only handled it because he prepared me to. He spent the last year of his life making sure that what he built would survive him, not for himself, but for the grandchildren he adored and the wife he trusted and the legacy he believed still meant something. He was right that it meant something. It meant everything. If you're watching this and you have a spouse who is aging, or parents who are aging, please talk to an estate attorney, not the family friend, not your son-in-law who handles commercial real estate closings. An independent attorney who represents you and only you. Family trust documents are not self-protecting. Kindness and good intentions are not legal safeguards. Harold knew that. He spent the last year of his life acting on it, and because he did, no one could take what he built. Not even the people he loved. Where are you watching from today, and what time is it there? And tell me in the comments, has someone you trusted ever surprised you, the way Louisa surprised me? I'd love to hear your stories. I've thought a lot about what actually saved us. Not the trust documents. Not the certified letter Patrice sent to Meridian. Not even the restructuring Harold and I did in those 6 weeks with her. All of that mattered, but none of it was first. What was first was a woman in a gray blazer standing by a punch bowl, deciding to do the harder thing. Louisa could have deleted that email. She could have told herself it wasn't her business, that she was just an assistant, that family matters were family matters. She held that folder in her desk drawer for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of knowing something and carrying it alone and asking herself what the right thing to do was. And then she did it. She drove 40 minutes each way to hand me a folder in a coffee shop. And she did it because she believed it was right, not because anyone would have blamed her for staying quiet. That's the thing about integrity that I didn't fully understand until I was in my 60s, sitting at my own kitchen table at 4 a.m. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a reward attached. Louisa didn't know what would happen when she gave me those pages. She just knew what she was supposed to do, and she did it. That's the whole of it. And Garrett, my son, who I love, who I will always love, made a different choice. He was smart. He'd always been smart. He'd always been smart. He understood trust law and asset valuation, and he had a plan that was sophisticated enough to require a specialist to untangle. But he used that intelligence in the service of something he knew was wrong, and because of that, all of it collapsed. Not because he got unlucky, because the whole structure of what he built depended on no one paying attention, and people pay attention. Harold paid attention. Louisa paid attention. I paid attention. When you build something dishonest, you have to keep building it. You have to maintain it, protect it, manage every person who might see through it. That is exhausting work, and it is fragile, and eventually something slips. a misdirected email, a folder left in a drawer, a wife who stays up until 4 in the morning reading. What Harold gave me wasn't just the legal protection. It was his trust. He'd been watching for 8 months, gathering enough certainty to act. And when the time came, he didn't panic and he didn't retreat. He sat down with Patrice and he thought clearly and he built something solid. That takes a particular kind of strength. Not the loud kind, not the kind that raises its voice at dinner tables, the quiet kind that just keeps working when everything feels uncertain. I want to be that kind of person. I think Harold was. The timber rights sold for $6.8 million and every dollar went into trust for the grandchildren. For Garrett's children too. That was Harold's decision and I honored it because I think he was right. What the children inherit shouldn't be smaller because their father made a bad choice. That's not how you break a cycle. You break it by being better than the thing that hurt you. I'm still learning how to do that. Most days I think I'm getting there.